welcome. This is another episode of Golda's Girls, and my co-host for today is Leah, and our very special guest is Tiffany Gabay. Welcome, Tiffany. We're so happy to help you, and you
Oh,
have an amazing, interesting story that we want to know everything about. And as I know what I saw about you, that you are the founder of Mizrahi Mosaic. So you are a very motivated, inspired person, and I would love you to tell a little bit more about yourself before we start with the questions.
of course, and thank you so much, Carla and Leah, for having me on the program.
Sure.
Yes, I have. So I have a Mizrahi. I come from a Mizrahi background, and we can get into what a Mizrahi Jew is for some of your viewers who may not be familiar. But before we do, I'll just quickly give a little bit of background on myself. My family is from Baghdad, Iraq. And then they immigrated to Israel under very dire circumstances, which again we can talk about maybe in a little bit. Um, my father was in the Haganah. He was actually in the 1948 War of Independence in Israel.
Wow.
And my siblings and I were born in the US, but with a very strong sense of understanding of the Middle East, the Middle Eastern culture, mindset as it relates to Jews, to Israel. And so, with that said, basically my entire personal life and pretty much my entire professional life, for the most part, I have dedicated to spreading awareness about the plight and the forgotten refugees of Jews in the Middle East. Those are Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. It's a very little known history, unfortunately, and chapter in our story that is
Yeah.
often unsung. And my background is as a journalist and media analyst, but I founded my own marketing agency many moons ago. And after October 7th, I kind of went back to my primary passion, which is educating the community, our different communities about the Mizrahi Jews, our relationship to the Middle East, and how we fit into the broader mosaic, right, of the Jewish people because Jews are not a monolith, as we are sometimes painted out to be, particularly by media and detractors of Israel and Zionism. And so I wanted very much to make sure that our story was heard and known and understood. So I'm in the process of putting together an anthology book about Mizrahi Jews, and the Mizrahi Mosaic is my organization that is kind of fledgling and dedicated to raising awareness through speaking engagements, media junkets, posting material, and sharing content that's related to the Mizrahi Jewish experience.
That's so fantastic. I will put the links and all that in the description later, so don't worry about that. And it brought it right away in me something. When I was in high school in the Netherlands, I'm from there, I made a project about the 850,000 Jews, more or less. Most of them Mizrahi Jews, right? But they were called then only Sephardim. They didn't speak about Sfaradim. They didn't speak so much about Mizrahi. And I told that story after 1948. I was thrown out, could not take anything. The whole story,
That's
nobody
right.
knew about it. And I didn't get an A. I think I got a D because the history teacher was even thinking, nah, no, you're just having a nice story about Israel while you see where that comes from. And nobody knew. And I'm so grateful that you
Wow.
bring that out. And I know the frustration from the inside out because my husband is Mizrahi, my ex-husband. And I heard from their side a lot of more about it. So
Absolutely.
yeah, what where in your family came in as your if your father was in the Haganah, right? Haganah.
Huh?
Haganah. He was there before yeah, Haganah. Before 48, he came or he came right after. How did that go?
Yes. Okay. So my family goes back in Iraq for many, many generations. And to give a little bit of background, yes, sometimes Sephardic Jews are lumped in with Mizrahi Jews or vice versa, or typically Mizrahi Jews might be referred to as Sephardic. And it's a completely understandable, I guess, categorization of how we're described, but really we're different communities. Sephardic Jews tended to come from the Iberian Peninsula, right? Spain, and some of them migrated to the Middle East and North Africa, whereas Mizrahi Jews originated really after the Babylonian exile in around the 6th century BC. They were exiled to that region of Iran, Iraq, and the surrounding region. And so they basically have many generations of roots in that particular area.
Yeah.
Um, you also have Persian ancestry as well, Persian Jewish ancestry, because there was a lot of migration, especially as empires kind of shifted their
Yeah.
borders and whatnot.
Yeah.
But my family, nonetheless, was primarily in Baghdad for many generations. And at a certain point, Iraq, like many other countries in the Middle East, was under different types of European mandates or control. So just like, Syria or Lebanon had the French influence, Iraq had the British influence, and it was a British mandate until about, I want to say about 1930 or so. I could
Hmm.
be off by a year. So the Jews of Baghdad in particular, now many people don't realize that Baghdad was comprised primarily of Jews and Christians. It was about a third, a third, and a third Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And Jews held very high-ranking positions. They were
Wow.
a very well-educated, well-regarded, and established community. They were in the upper echelons of government, of every type of business and industry. And they were like that for a very long time. After Britain gave back control to Iraq, things started to change. My family, my father was one of five, and to kind of backtrack a little bit, and this is something that very few people know. As the Holocaust was starting to brew, the beginning machinations of the Holocaust,
Hmm.
the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem
Yes.
wouldn't be called like was
Yes.
considered Palestinian back then, but by today's standards, a
Moved to
Palestinian
Jerusalem. Yeah.
was conspiring, did start to conspire and collaborate with the Nazis
And Hitler. Yeah.
and wanted to knew that there was a Jewish problem, quote unquote, in the Middle East, just as there was a quote unquote Jewish problem in Europe,
Yeah.
and wanted to bring the organization and the methodology of the Nazis to deal with the quote unquote Jewish problem of the Jews in the Middle East. And Iraq was sort of their pilot or their launch pad, so to speak. So, beginning in the 1930s,
Hmm.
German embassies in Iraq started to disseminate a lot of anti-Semitic propaganda. And leading up into around 1940, 1941, they were disseminating and translating Mein Kampf into Arabic. They had their own version of Hitler Youth in
Yeah.
Iraq called Al Fatwa.
Yeah.
And so little by little, the Arab street was really fomenting this hatred and getting really whipped up. There was like there are so many in so many cases across the world, they were really capitalizing on, anger, jealousy, resentment, feeling threatened. Jews were a largely successful and well-regarded minority in Iraq at the time. And it didn't really take a lot to whip up the angry mob, so to speak. And by the time 1941 rolled around, my dad was about 10 years old at the time. Um, Baghdad suffered a pogrom called the Farhud.
Farhud. Yeah.
Farhud in Arabic means violent dispossession. It's like a violent or visceral dispossession.
Yeah.
And very much, and my father recalled, even though he was only 10, he recanted all the stories to me because I was collecting his stories for his memoirs. And a lot of the atrocities that we saw on October 7th happened then, happened in
Yeah.
Baghdad. And again, in the war in 48, which I can go into in a little bit. a little bit more detail in a little while. But the bottom line is, yes, that was sort of the beginning of the end of the Iraqi Jewish community. And now there are different numbers because it was always very hard to tally the death tolls or the casualty numbers, but they estimate anywhere between 600 and about 1,000
Yeah.
Iraqi Jews were murdered, men, women, children,
Slaughtered. Yeah.
babies, like just like what we saw
Slaughtered,
on a
slaughtered. Yeah. I have a
7.
book about it. Yeah.
Yes. And so my father was there. He survived. He fought back with my grandfather. He was the oldest boy, so that was really, he was a grown man by then. And after that, he was truly traumatized, and he begged his parents to let him go live in Jerusalem with an uncle, a relative. And they smuggled him into Jerusalem. And he basically went to Israel pre-state. It was 1942. And from there, as he grew older, he
Wow.
learned
Wow.
Hebrew. My family's first language is Arabic. He learned Hebrew. He learned the ways of the land, and he joined the Haganah and ended up going into battle
Wow.
in 19.
Powerful. Powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So this
powerful that he would go to Haganah, I'm sorry, to
no.
fight against the country he just came from. Is that accurate?
Yes, yes. Iraq was part of the seven Arab armies. Yeah, he didn't realize it at the time, right? He just wanted to
Right.
escape. And one of the
Sure.
things my father always said is, wherever I kind of ran, he was a fighter. He was very brave. He was a war hero. He was in the unit that liberated Beersheba, all those wonderful things, rest in peace. But he was trying to get away from this murderous cult and this, savagery. And unfortunately, it followed him. It followed him to Israel and when he was in the war there. And then when, he immigrated to the US, he dealt with anti-Semitism here in different forms. And then eventually we started to see certain issues with Islamists here in the US as well. And he's like, I fled Iraq, I left Israel, and
Wherever I
they
go, it
followed me
shows up.
here. Wherever you go, there's sort of no escape from it because this is like a cancer that spreads this,
Yeah.
Yeah,
unfortunate.
wow.
Uh,
Why did he decide and your parents decided to go to the US, to immigrate to the US?
Correct. So my father, I'll backtrack a little bit. My father was the first to immigrate to Israel pre-state. The rest of my family, however, all my aunts and uncles, my grandparents, great grandmother, aunts, everybody were in Iraq for about another 10 years.
Mm.
They ultimately were rescued by Israel in Operation Ezra in around 1951.
Wow.
At this point, it was, by now 10 years in the making, 15 years in the making, the Iraqi Jewish community was in dire, dire straits. And they were forced to be dhimmis or, they would have to give up everything. So ultimately, they were stripped of, my grandfather was a very successful business owner, owned properties and land, and was stripped of everything, right down to family photographs and vital records in order to leave the country. So they left with pretty much nothing but the clothes on their back, if that. And they were absorbed by Israel and ended up in a refugee camp in Petah Tikva. My father, after the war, he reunites with his family around 1951 in the refugee camp, and his father was ailing at this point. And I think all of the trauma that my father experienced and that the rest of my family experienced is they wanted a fresh start. And so my father's plan or his vow was that he would go to America, which of course all the soldiers learned by watching movies. And America was paved with golden streets. At least that was the image of old Hollywood. And he said he would go to America and make enough money to bring the rest of my family over. And unfortunately, it
Huh,
took another 10 years to do that. And in the
huh.
meantime, my grandfather passed away, and many things changed in those additional 10 years while the rest of my family remained in Israel. So my family is Israeli, they're Zionists, they sacrificed everything for Israel, but they also wanted safety. And I think that they were very concerned for that and felt that their children might have the best shot at peace if they brought them and had their families in the US. And so my
Yeah,
parents and I were all born here. That's how
you
we
can
ended.
I
just
think there's such a difference growing up Ashkenazi. I think I told you, Tiffany, it's such a different experience, what you're talking about than the experience I've had growing up Ashkenazi. And just the way that you talk about the anti-Semitism, I think that the Jews were more integrated in the Middle East than they were in Europe. In Europe, they were always separate. There's ghettos, there's like, you stay here, we'll stay here, right? But in the Middle East, the Jews felt more, ethnically similar to the people in the, I mean, you're Middle Easterners, that's what you are, right? And
honestly,
it's
if I look
just
at
so
Western
different.
Europe, they
Hmm?
were really very integrated. The Dutch Jews were extremely integrated.
I guess we're talking different time periods, of
The
course.
Germans, yeah, if you speak like the last 150 years, since Napoleon in 70, 80 years,
Yes, I'm talking Eastern. I'm sorry, I want to clarify.
yeah,
Eastern
Eastern Europe,
European Jews with
yes,
the Pale of Settlement. That's what I
yes.
was referring to.
And I
Yeah.
think also interesting what you brought up, Leah, that Ashkenazim in America, it makes a huge difference if your family came 250 years ago, 200 years ago, 150 years ago, or your
Yeah.
family came after the Shoah, after the
Yes,
Holocaust.
yes,
So
yes.
those Ashkenazim have the same kind of a feeling of persecution and being tired of persecution. What I hear a little bit in your story, Tiffany, about your dad, you want the safety for your kids. It was the same thing when we left the Netherlands in 2004. I would have loved to go on Aliyah to Israel, but there were exploding buses and my kids were very little. And it's like, do you bring your kids to a war-torn country at that moment? In addition that my Hebrew is not the greatest, then how can I work there? But that will be solved over time. But that is as a parent, I can totally see that.
Yeah.
It is the pain point too. We are here
Safety.
and they are
Yes.
there.
And
You
like,
said it, safety.
and I think about that with my own child, right? Because we had always had dreams to make Aliyah or to go back. And I very much see myself in my parents' shoes now or my family's shoes, because it's one thing for me, my father wasn't afraid for himself. I'm not afraid for myself. I would go, but for your kids, it's a different
Yeah,
story, and
exactly. Yeah.
you're extra careful.
Mine are adults now, so I'm free to go.
And my adult sons live in Israel, so that's it.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
true. You're
Yeah.
here.
I'm here. It's just crazy. I just feel that the experiences of Jews are actually converging. I don't know what you think about that, but I think that anti-Semitism takes different forms, as you said, and it's just you didn't have to deal with the Holocaust, but like you said, you had the Farhud. I had never heard of till right now. It is amazing how separate I always felt from the Spartim. All I knew was really good music and really good spices. So I'm like, let's learn more. I'm just going to throw out a question. So differences between Mizrahim, Sephardi, and Ashkenazim. I mean, I just said a few, but if you want to grab that,
So
a
I'll
big
start,
question.
I'll start with some of the cultural stuff. So as
Sure.
as you noted, Leah, earlier, and this is quite interesting. And yes, in many ways, we're all culturally influenced by the origins in which we come, or where geographically in the world we come from.
Yes.
So yes, our food, our culture is very Middle Eastern. Our souls, our practices, our values are Jewish. But the food, the music, the certain mannerisms and emotionality, all that stuff is very, very Middle Eastern. And one of the things that I think is so much better now than it was when my father was young and new to Israel is there's a lot more integration and acceptance of the different communities, Mizrahi, Sephardic, Ethiopian, Ashkenazi, and then of course within the Ashkenazi world you have Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and everything in between. And yes, everything you have all these little nuances depending on which country and which
Yeah.
time
Right.
period you
Yeah.
came from, right?
Totally. Yeah.
But one of the things that my family definitely experienced is, yes, in Iraq, um, they mixed with Muslims and Christians. They were still Jewish. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was still anti-Semitism in its own nuances and its own kind of incarnations there. Um, but it didn't really stop people necessarily, especially the educated classes, from being friends with anybody or socializing or being part of the broader community. However, we were always viewed as Jews, right? Just like in Europe, even if you integrated, I mean, you were still Jewish. At the end of the day, that was still something that was known and sort of understood and maybe differentiated you and your family from the rest, right? So
Did you have,
there
if I may interrupt you here, did you have a dhimmi status or you were like a citizen like everybody else?
So not when, okay, so that was why my family left was because they were going to be made into have to kind of be made demies after after Britain gave back control to Iraq. That was where it was headed, and they didn't want to
And
do
that's paying a tax, right?
correct, stripped of all of your properties and things
Second
like
class
have
citizen.
the right to own land, like exactly own land. You have to pay certain tax, things like that. You're a second.
Move off the sidewalk if somebody's walking, right? I don't know if that's, I've heard
I'm
that.
not sure if that was specifically one thing, but yes, pretty much all of the general the
Mm.
rules that are associated with it. So so the sort of sad joke was that, in Iraq we were Jews and in Israel we were Arabs. And so
Mm.
that was definitely part of the identity struggle and a struggle for acceptance and integration, right? Is that because of our differences and because of our cultural,
Yeah.
uniqueness, let's say, um, maybe the broader Jewish community, because they weren't as familiar or exposed to Mizrahi and
Right.
Sephardic Jews. So we were very much considered different and more Middle Eastern than we were Jewish, even though we were always raised to believe, you're
Yeah.
Jewish first above anything, right? Your origins come second, but
Yeah.
sometimes, we don't, as human beings, always see it that way. And it's gotten a lot better. So I'm very happy to see
Yeah,
that.
that is not something that looks so is so nice if you look back at that. And there's so many different kinds of Jews. And then I can see yeah, the Yekes from Germany, they had their own island in
Hmm.
Tennessee, right?
Right.
And yeah, you can say, wow, that is like discrimination to our own people. And it is very primitive that people that we do that we just say we do that we prefer to be with our own kind, and Jews or not Jewish doesn't matter. If you're with Jews, then Ashkenazim have that, or you come from this area, you have this culture, you love your culture, you want to keep it, and then you are not open. That's, and I think it was also a period in Israel for those first 30, 40 years with so many, all the wars and the pain and the trauma. There was so much to put so many people together that you need
Yeah,
to do really emotional work and inclusive work, call it whatever. To, yeah, I heard it from my ex-husband who came to Israel in 1946. No, 1964. And yeah, he couldn't speak for 2 years because he didn't know the language and nobody helped him. And he was teased because he didn't speak Hebrew. I mean, you know, so there's so many traumas also. And it is,
exactly.
yeah, misunderstanding, not respectful here and there. Yeah. And
Exactly.
I
And
can
that's
see that that motivated you for the mosaic, or how you say it. I say it probably wrong, that you have a vision there, what you want to accomplish.
exactly. And I think it's very much, yes, that we are a mosaic. We are a very diverse community and people. And one of the things that has been so sad is that a narrative has been allowed to be constructed and perpetuated that paints Jews as a monolith. Number one, particularly in Israel, as these white European colonizers, which couldn't be further from the truth. The majority of the Israeli population are actually Sephardic and Mizrahi,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
so that's number one. And number two,
Mm.
we are very, very diverse and we have many different stories. And I think one of the other things that's important and that I wanted to bring more awareness to, and this goes back to your question as well, your original question, Leah, about the differences. between, let's say, Ashkenazim in general and Mizrahim. And I don't like to speak in generalities, but I will say among the
Mhm.
Ashkenazi community in the US, at least, um, and Mizrahim in general. Now, the majority of Mizrahim live in Israel, and then we have a pretty strong community in the US, Australia, the UK, but the majority of us live in Israel. Um, because we come from the Middle East, often for many, many generations, we really do have an understanding, again, of the mentality, of the culture, of the mindset, and of the inherent anti-Semitism and how it can manifest itself, and that can lead to violence, right? And persecution and
Mhm.
these never-ending wars and terrorism. And that has shaped and informed our politics, our societal views and the way we sort of, carry on with our daily lives and things. And I wanted to make sure that I could share that perspective and that experience because there is a certain sense, and I think it's simply because many American Jews are removed from it, either through many generations or because their experience is very particular. They only see anti-Semitism as coming from the right. And, and understandably, I understand where that originates from. But there are also maybe quite a bit assimilated to a Western way of life. And, whereas someone who's first generation or immigrant and coming from the Middle East and understanding the mindset and the culture can sort of raise the alarm bells. A lot of the things that members of the community, Mizrahi community, and I were, basically screaming about and trying to warn everybody about, since before 9/11 and certainly since 9/11 were so disregarded, and we were called Islamophobes or we were called alarmists or Cassandras or this or that. And then, a lot of the things, sadly, that we were trying to warn everybody about have been,
Yeah.
coming to
I
fruition.
noticed that. I noticed that so much in my own environment. The awareness, or the political awareness, or the social awareness with the problems we're going through now is
Yeah.
really so divided from. And I think an additional problem is with European or Jews that are related to the Holocaust, which a lot of people still are, of course, even if you didn't live through it and your family, your ancestors and the persecution for 2000 years because it was not really great to live in Poland and Russia, etc. There is like it's what happened to us should not happen ever again to nobody. We will not do that. We will not, repeat the story. We will treat other people good. I see it in the Netherlands too. We left for that reason because my kids were afraid to be Jewish, and I had been personally life threatened because I was very in so many organizations, and I said certain things, and I was okay to threat me and offend me, but to say something, hey, I read the Quran, I wanted to understand, I got Muslim friends, and I have still great Muslim friends. So I'm not generalizing, but there is a mentality that people don't understand if you don't come from those countries, and that's exactly what you say. I see that in the friends of my kids too. Yeah.
And then I could just say, growing up in the United States, I barely experienced anything of anything. Very little anti-Semitism. It was like I almost think it was a golden age in the 80s. I mean, it's just maybe one penny was thrown at me, but I did never felt unsafe ever. I never felt anything. But Europe, obviously, you had the Holocaust, you had the Farhud there. I mean, the roots were not here. So
But
that's
you
why it
also
was
blend
so,
in perfectly. You really look, you can be American. And you're
yeah.
a person. You might as well
Except
just,
that my father was born in Israel and I'm half Israeli myself. But it wasn't until I got to Israel when I found like, wait, Mizrahim, like what? Okay, this is great food. This is great music. Why isn't everyone getting along? Like, I don't get it. Like, am I missing something? And you guys really understood, like, from the roots, what the mentality is. We don't know. We know,
yes.
and we know. I know. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
And
so
we do,
different.
and many of us don't
No.
want to listen either. My background is in Holland, Sephardic and Ashkenazi is very blended. So we
Mm.
don't have those distinctions so much anymore at all. And but they think if you come from Europe, you must be Ashkenazi, but it doesn't matter what you are, you have the same way of thinking. And that's so powerful that you bring that up. And I think it's very under misunderstood. I don't want to give a political analysis, but what I heard, and then mainly from my ex-husband, because I spoke to him every day after October 7th, and he lives in Israel, that what happened in the army with being not aware before 10/7 by dismissing all the warnings they got from the girls, telling them there's something going to happen. No, we can do that with we can handle that with technology. And no, they're fine. They want to eat and live, and they don't want, it was so like dismissed from, I would say, arrogance from thinking you know better. Well, boy, there's a bill to be paid, and I think that you guys, if I may formulate it like you guys, if you come from those countries, you have much better understanding, and you're not so surprised.
No, unfortunately and sadly,
Unfortunately,
not
yeah,
surprised. And I think one of the things the West makes a very grave mistake doing, and some people in Israel as well,
yeah,
they ascribe a Western
project,
perception of the world. They
yeah,
project
yeah,
their own values and worldviews onto a people for whom that is totally alien.
yeah,
It is a completely different mindset and culture,
yeah,
completely. And unless you live in it or among it or are from that part of the world and have really seen it and experienced firsthand, I mean, there are people who are critical thinkers and can kind of see, listen, they're telling us who they are, believe them. But there are still people who just think, oh my God, if I'm just good enough, I'll be rewarded. They won't hate. They won't kill me. They won't be guilty of the worst atrocities. But that is simply untrue.
yeah.
Um, and
Would you
unfortunately,
say I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say it's because it's very hard to comprehend that
Is
way of thinking.
Is it because would you say it's tribal, that tribal mentality, and that's their family, and Jews, you're not part of that family. So it's easy. It's easy. I mean, if there's fighting within the family, they do that anyway, but I mean, there is always different families and they're always vying
But
for
then that's for everyone. That's also for the Jews in
no, but
Israel.
in Israel,
There
in the
are
Middle East,
two
it's
groups.
water. There's
I
scarcity
think
of
that,
resources.
yeah, but
So yeah.
I think that Tiffany means more the way of thinking. The Arabic way of thinking is different. The Middle Eastern way of thinking is different than the Western way of thinking. And the Western people don't get that. And you speak about the differences.
Yes.
For instance, I would say that honor is the highest, maybe one of the highest
Mm.
values. To me, one of the maybe the highest value. If as a parent, as a father, you can kill your daughter as in the part of honor killing because you don't agree with her way of living. And that happened in Europe a lot, but they cover it because they don't want to speak about it too much. That is totally alien of how in a Western way of looking to humanity, we don't do that. And then we don't have to be on the path, we are better people because that's never the solution, but we have different values, and their values are really, if you're able in the Netherlands, it's like this. If you as a father do the honor killing of your daughter, you get maybe 10, 15 years jail, prison. If he lets his son of 14 doing it, he gets much less because he is a minor. I mean, that's how they play with our laws, and it's accepted.
So where does this come from? Is it from the tribal? Do you think there's like a family and Jews are not part of the family? Like where is this?
So, okay,
I know Iraq has many different tribes, so
uh, so I'm not. I don't want to get into a theological analysis. As I do
sure.
know and have very dear Muslim friends who
Mm-hmm.
are practicing and who
Mm-hmm.
do not interpret the Quran in the way that it is often interpreted. So I'm not going to sit there and, make blanket statements. However, what I will say is there is origin and there is basis for it in the Quran. So it's in very fundamental, first and foremost, to the people. Okay. So you have a few things. You have very unequivocally anti-Semitic verses that dehumanize Jews and call for their expulsion, for their murder, for we are cursed, we are ape descendants of apes and pigs.
Yeah.
Wherever you shall find a Jew, you should slay him. All of those things are already given a basis of credibility, right, in their texts. Then you have a faith and a culture that does proselytize, that does convert, okay, and did seek expansion. And then, of course, there are all of the different values. If you believe that whether by way of your destiny or it is your God-given right to subjugate or that you are better than another people and that you are in the right to conquer another people or to expel another people or to murder another people. And this is something good that God wants you to do, or whether that's true or not, but that's how they're interpreting it. So that's one thing, first and foremost. There is a very much a tribal element, a very much an us versus them mentality. But there's a couple of different offshoots, and this is such a complicated part of the world because you have to understand the Palestinians are not necessarily, at least they never really were, very religious. I mean, now you have all of these mosques and everything and all that stuff. They were na Arab nationalists.
Yeah.
That is very different. The war in 48 was very much a war of Arab nationalism. Islamism and political Islam and getting into the whole almost religious war crusade aspect of it is mixed in with it. And it's definitely picked up steam since 9/11. But not everyone who wages war or looks to kill Jews and Israelis is doing so strictly for religious, let's say, under the guise of religiosity. It's also about their own nationalistic movement as well. And very much, in that way, they are very much the new Nazis. So
Well, I think you phrased that
there's a
extremely
supremacist
well.
ideology, in other words.
You phrased it
Mhm.
extremely well and very safely. Do you
Yeah.
know the Imam of Peace, Tawhidi? Do you know him?
Oh, yes,
He
yes, of
is
course.
such an amazing person, to my opinion. He has also protected, I think, with guards because of the way he speaks, but he is an amazing. So we have the most
So courageous.
courageous people there too.
Yes. And I want to say something.
Mhm.
We oftentimes say, where are the moderate Muslims coming and speaking out and condemning this?
Yeah,
And they do exist. And I'm very, very blessed to be close with mm, I won't say many because it's a hard road, right, for them to be able to speak out, and they run a huge, huge risk in doing so. But the ones who do, yes, they have fatwas issued on them. They are under death threat
yeah.
constantly. I know one particular friend, he and his family had to move into hiding. So it's absolutely tragic and horrible. And so when people, I don't blame them, right? Because we talked about the concern for our children, let's say, right? And let's say, moving to a place that is
Right.
where we could be
It's not
targeted
easy.
and abused. So, good people, good Muslims don't want to risk of course, risk their lives or their children's lives because that's exactly what will happen. Unfortunately, the power is in the mob, right? And then unfortunately, the mob is, very
Large.
violent and very effective in squashing those voices.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is a tragedy because I was curious what's your vision about that. The hostages, right? And Gaza is so tiny. And now we hear, for instance, that boy that was liberated a year ago that he only got a little piece of bread, an 11-year-old boy on somebody's ceiling, not in ceiling, in what is it, the attic. He got a piece of bread thrown to him now and then by somebody I think it was a doctor or the director of a hospital. Now, that does not sound very warm and caring. So there's a lot of hate and so much hate that cannot be human to a child anymore. Now, I'm thinking the following. I know it's for Palestinians, the Arabs in the Palestinians in Gaza hard probably to say there and there are hostages. You know, it's maybe hard to do it, but they also speak to family members in America. How many live in America? Many. I had a few Palestinian clients in my practice as well. And I don't hear much. You can do it anonymously also on social media. You can just, so many people are anonymously. I have reposted videos only from Arabs and Muslims and Arab Christian Arabs that were saying like the son of Hamas and Yosef Haddad and you know all of them, I'm sure. And I only reposted that on TikTok half a year ago. You have no clue how many death threats I got by only reposting those voices. And then I'm thinking it is not so difficult because you can be very incognito today. So there are not many Muslims that live in America that say something to support Israel or to support the hostages or come with like I know where they are because my cousin told me. I mean there are ways to do that. That's for me a shocking second effect of, and I understand the fear, but there comes a limit to the fear. There are moments that you can make it happen.
Correct. And I think every region and every part of the world and every community, it has its own unique circumstances. So, and I will exclude Gaza from that. Gaza is really particularly virulent.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say, any of the West Bank is with Fatah is any better by
Mm-hmm.
any stretch. But yes, there's been a great analogy that even in Nazi Germany, there were Germans that would still risk their lives and tried to help Jews. And there were even Nazi soldiers. Um, my my husband's grandfather was actually spared. His whole first family was murdered, but his life, my husband's grandfather's life, was spared by a Nazi soldier. So even in that, there were moments, there were glimmers of humanity. We didn't see that at all. And in fact, what we're seeing is like young children absolutely brainwashed
With
with
hate.
the most pure, unadulterated hatred. And I think this is one of the things that is very important for people to understand is the brainwashing is so deep and so pervasive and starts at such an early age that it is absolutely a lot of people in the West cannot fathom it, but a child would literally very happily saying happily, they don't know why they should be happy. They were brainwashed to be this way, would absolutely kill a Jew on the spot if they could. And this is coming from firsthand accounts from my own father and what he witnessed back in 1948. I
Yeah.
have another family member who served in Yom Kippur War, another one in Six-Day War. And when they went into different Palestinian territories and areas, they walked into schools. And the textbooks are if you have 10 Jews and you kill 3 Jews,
How
how
many are
many
left?
Jews
Yeah.
left do you have to
Yeah.
kill?
Yeah.
And how, I mean, that in itself is a human rights abuse, but you won't hear anyone screaming about it, right? Children are absolutely bred and raised and brainwashed from the earliest age. And
Now
so
you
it's
say that.
all very, very challenging, very
Yeah, now
difficult.
you say that in Europe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there were a lot of people speaking about the textbooks, and there was a movement that didn't want the European Union to, or even the Netherlands, to support financially the textbooks because there was also money, there's a lot of money going there. It
Yeah.
took so long until the power, like in the United Nations, got so far to speak out with that, right? That's horrible. It's so simple. What you say there, they have also those movies and these caricatures and they for little kids. And how can we ever undo that? You know,
I think
because
it's a trifecta. It's really challenging because you've got this virulent, ideology. You have the structure, let's say the UN, and then you've got the money flow, and you've got a lot of money. It's not a little amount, and it's people's jobs, livelihood. It's a huge behemoth. It's a big structure, and the only way to really dismantle it is to step back and say, does this align with our values? And Western civilization, Western world so far can barely manage to do that, which is surprising because you talked about both of you, the West and this different mentality is how come the West can't see it? Like how they'd have to look at themselves and say, is this it, what does this mean if I'm okay with all this barbarism? Like then they don't feel like they still feel like separated and safe from it on some level. And I don't it's sort of interesting that the mindset.
Well, you saw that October 8th. I was expecting that October 8th there was a lot of
Yeah.
marching and support in Australia on the street, gas the Jews, and in so many other places. It's like, many people knew that was going to happen, but the Jews or but the Israelis.
Yeah. Yeah. After October 7th, I said, we'll be very lucky if we get any sympathy. And if we do, it'll be for a couple of days. And that will
Oh,
be it. And then it's gonna be
Interesting.
and sure enough, that was, what happened. There was like maybe 5 minutes of sympathy when the GoPro footage was being shown and things like that. And then, you know,
the
it was
denial, even the
quickly
denial. Yeah.
turned back.
That's
Uh,
such a different response than we had. I mean, they're two opposite responses. Yours, Carla, you're saying you'd hope for sympathy. You're saying, no, we're not going to get as much as I want. You knew.
oh, wait,
Interesting.
How
I knew.
come you knew that? I was surprised that it would be a few days. How knew you were? Because you speak about the Western world sympathy now, or empathy, or compassion. That was. How do you know? How did you know?
I think it's just having, again, understanding the propaganda war that the Palestinians play,
Yeah.
understanding how Western societies have treated Israel in the past many decades, the fact that seeing the moral equivalence really spread like a cancer. I also started to see more and more, and this was over the course of a number of years, people who were, generally eh, liberal, let's say, but really started changing and twisting the narrative to say that Israel was committing genocide, which they've said for a long time, but starting to turn them into the Nazis.
Yeah.
So using that language, like Bibi
Hmm.
is Hitler, just
Oh, but they
really
did that for years
more
as well, right?
moral relativism, very just bizarre stuff that was completely turned on its head. And seeing those arguments gain traction, right? And of course, we saw, see what was happening in academia way before October 7th. Because some of the initiatives that I've worked with for many, many years were to help combat and identify anti-Semitism on campus and to support our students on campus. And so this has been going on for so long. And to anyone who really follows this a lot and saw all these pieces lining up, it was obvious to me, A, that there isn't anything that the Palestinians did that shocked me, as horrible as that sounds, because my father recanted stories that I won't go into graphic details, but as I was putting together
Hmm.
copy for his memoirs, horrible atrocities that he witnessed in Iraq and during the 48 war at the hands of Arabs. And they were very similar
Yeah.
to what happened on October 7th.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that, I mean, it's horrific no matter what, but it just, unfortunately, and I knew that there would always be these whataboutisms and rationalizations and burying their head in the sand and just no matter what, it's the world has gotten it into its head that, you've the good guys and the bad guys have been reversed. So there really isn't, and I don't know if a part of it is the internet or what has gone on with a polarization that dehumanizes the other side so much. And it's just you're for us, you're against us, you're in this tribe or you're in that tribe. And there really isn't any logic or reason that can sway the people who are really championing a particular cause once they dig their heels in. Um, and I'll give you an example. There was a business coach, so I come from a marketing background, and there was a business coach that I knew, a colleague of mine, was a CMO at some very big Fortune 500 companies, very intelligent, very great at what she did. Um, and she's kind of political, very much on the left. She used a lot of code speak, like a lot of the DEI and anti-racism code speak. And I just kind of, that was her thing, whatever. Um, After October 7th, I'm thinking, okay, well, she loves to champion human rights causes. Surely she's going to say something. Of course she didn't. Okay. And she immediately started posting about how Zionists are the new Nazis and Zionists are occupiers and the genocide. And so, because I know her very well, and I know that she's an intelligent person, supposedly, I said, listen, I am the Zionist that you're decrying. And I want to have like an open conversation with you. I think your heart is, I led with a very I wasn't attacking her. I led from a very open-minded place, thinking, let me see if I can change a heart or mind, or at least see if she is open-minded.
Mm-hmm.
And normally don't waste my time when people start speaking like that. But because I knew her personally, I kind of wanted to see if she would give me the
Yeah.
respect of listening to what I had to say. I sent her reams and reams of information and so well thought out and reasoned and this and that. And I said, I kind of don't think she's going to say or do anything about it, but I just wanted to do it for myself. Right. And she didn't. She blew me off. She blocked me. And ever since then, every day she has gone on about, basically reposting every Bollywood video she can. And this is what it's come to. And this is a person with a huge platform, a huge platform,
Scary.
big following, and
It is so hard because you bring up now that emotional part, and I have dealt a lot with that myself. And I was like, if I get a new client and they are like this, I cannot help them. I have no, my vision of unconditional love is not there because if you want to kill me, the moment you say from the river to the sea, you mean all Jews can die because it means you are excluded entirely. You don't know the story. I can forgive you that you don't know the story, but have some modesty. First, learn something before you open your mouth. I have been attacked with that the same thing, while I know a lot about it. Of course, I don't know everything. Nobody knows, but that mentality. That's I find one of the hardest things too. That how people deal with it, and it is that people that you consider like your business coach as a reasonable, intelligent, nice person, even human rights activist, right, or open for human rights they're blind and they think they serve a good cause. Now, I spoke this week to a friend of my daughter who is a psychotherapist, and she also lost her. She's Persian. She lost her joy of work, which she had very much before. Also, pretty big following on social media, and she was also severely attacked by people, by clients, and you realize how hard it is to find if you deal with that to who can you say do we only want Jewish clients or do they need to be what is the criteria there but if you meet somebody that wants to kill you I compare it to like do I want do I want to teach Nazis do I want to teach do I want to yeah I could even have that easier in a way because Nazis are even today less horrible than what comes out of the mouth of many people that we do know or don't know. So that is an additional problem. You don't trust, you don't have an open heart anymore to the world because before you know, there's the knife.
Exactly, exactly. And just because I have this my worldview that isn't shocked and has very low expectations, I'm when it comes to certain things as relates to this topic. I also am a person with a very open heart. And it is my nature to be embracing and accepting of everyone, anyone.
Hmm.
However, there is that adage that if you are kind to the cruel, it is to be cruel to the kind. And I do believe that as well. And so there are certain things I've never tolerated or allowed into my inner sanctum in my life. And people who have a certain worldview, some people have that worldview because they're ignorant. Ignorance, I can somewhat forgive if there is an open mind and a willingness to learn. But if there isn't, then that's dangerous.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
it's not a
can't
bliss. Ignorance is often not a bliss.
exactly. And wouldn't we all love there to be peace and to be friends with everyone? I mean, who wouldn't love that? But
Yeah.
that is not unfortunately, the reality of life.
Yes.
And I think it's hard for people to accept that. But
It's so interesting. You just said the word. I was thinking reality. You said the reality of life, and I was thinking about all these kids on college campuses. What do they know? I'm sorry, I always say, the younger, what do they know? But what do they really know of life? We've become more and more removed because of the phone, and they don't understand that the words that they speak spill a human being's blood somewhere, not so far away. It's a small planet. It's gotten much smaller since the internet. I always think about that. Like stupidity earlier would just be stupidity. Now it's lethal for other people. So that's why I really go back to education. That's why I think this is so great why we're doing this. We're educating because this is where we have to question like what our beliefs are. And do we really think that other people just don't have a right to live? I mean, what does that say about us as human beings? Really? Really?
Yeah.
Really?
That's
I mean, are we human? What are we? Who are we? Like, I mean,
it's beyond primitive. It's the
exactly. If we're gonna condone barbarism, then we are barbaric as a human. Like I'm not just pointing fingers. I'm just saying if I condone that, then what is? I was just thinking about myself. Um. Anyway, this is a heavy topic, but
it
it's
is.
good to it's a necessary topic because it's what we're seeing and we're experiencing, and your father experienced it, and you through that you're not surprised. It's there's been we have standouts for the B-bus children we've had for 18 months now in my town. And it's always the ones from the Mizrahim that show up, that they get it. They show up, they hold the flags, you know.
Really?
Yep. Anyone from the Middle East that's Jewish here, they get it. I don't have to say a
Yeah.
word, and they're
Yeah.
the most motivated.
But they show
They
up
know.
and others don't show up?
I'm
Ashkenazim don't
saying
show
no. We have both Ashkenaz and Sephardic and Mizrahim, but the Mizrahim really get it. Like I don't have to push them. They get it. They're motivated. There's
That's what
no,
she said in the beginning, Tiffany. Yeah.
that's
yeah,
right. And one of the big things that I always try to educate people on, and when we talk about the refugee crisis, is as you mentioned earlier, Carla, the 850,000 or so, just under 1 million Mizrahi Jews, Jews from the Middle East and North Africa who were displaced, they were exiled. They were persecuted. They were subject to horrors like the Farhud, like my family was, and they were expelled. Right? These
Yeah.
are Jews who had lived in the Middle East and the surrounding region for millennia. In some
right.
cases, the Iraqi Jewish community is about 2,700 years old,
Yeah.
Wow.
and
That is so interesting too, because the Jews that lived there, we spoke about it before, like Mesopotamia, Babylon. What is their origin, but you can trace back that you know of?
So, from what I understand, and this might be the case for Sephardic Jews as well, I believe typically Mizrahim are traced back to the tribe of Judah, and then they were in, part of the, as I said, the Babylonian exile, I think in around the 6th century BC, and that's how they came to Babylon, Mesopotamia, this whole area, different parts of the Persian Empire, and they sort of
Yeah.
dispersed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. It's
It,
bizarre.
it's interesting. I just happened to have been in Italy 2 weeks ago, and I saw the first printing of the Babylonian Talmud. It was by, I think, Daniel Bomberg, who Jews couldn't print. He was a Christian, and he printed it. And it shows up in Italy. It's just
Bizarre. Bizarre.
bizarre.
I
I'd
don't
never
know about
seen it.
that.
It's an early copy. Yeah.
Okay, now we are getting to the end of this wonderful interview, I would say. Then we have our habit of the anti-Semite of the week and the hero of the week. So, Leah, if you will start with your anti-Semite.
Honestly, it was the Palestinian girls' faces this morning that broke my heart. The joy on the young girls' faces of the dead bodies of the children. That to me was like staring into an abyss. I it's exactly what we're talking about. That's it.
That's so, yeah, so horrible.
Yeah.
Tiffany.
So they are nameless, but I'm not sure if you caught the news. I believe it was last week of two Australian nurses
I've seen them.
um,
Yes.
in, I think it was New South Wales, and they were kind of caught on camera with an Israeli TikToker bragging about how if any Israelis or Jews presented in the hospital, they would refuse to treat them, they would kill them, they will kill them, and they have killed Israelis or
Yeah.
Jews.
Yeah.
And one of them was an Afghani, I believe, refugee who had been living in Australia for quite some time, and the other was born and raised in Australia, both Muslim nurses. Thank God, they were suspended or fired sort of immediately. They are under investigation now. I believe they found morphine and some other very questionable things in
Yes.
one of
Yes.
the nurses' lockers. So yeah, and unfortunately, there were a couple of other instances that came out, I think, in the UK, a couple of other doctors. This is really being uncovered quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, I think there are more out there like that than we would care to know, probably. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is
that was
an
chilling as well, because they're taking a Hippocratic oath, thou shalt do no harm,
yes.
and
Yes.
no matter what, and that is also very
But
chilling.
that's again a
Yeah.
Western cult, and that's why they don't have their original laws with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. There is on Instagram Physicians Against Anti-Semitism, and that is a group of people, and they catch a lot of those. They expose them
Yeah.
and all that. Yeah. So there are too many to choose from. I choose something today because this, of course, was my country. The two IDF soldiers, as guys, just guys for vacation, came to the Netherlands, and they were discovered on the internet that they were doing that, and the Palestinian group in the Netherlands caught them and they wanted to take action, beat them up, and whatever. So they probably called the Israeli embassy and they were picked up and brought back to Israel. So that's allowed in the Netherlands. And then people say, yeah, not everybody is like that. That's allowed in the Netherlands. Let's forget now, let's even talk what happened a few months ago with the pogrom, with how we
So
call it,
this just happened, Carla?
3 days ago. Yeah.
I
They
didn't
were
know that.
with the social media, they found, oh, because there are a lot of people, we spoke about names, right? You hide your name. You can be so infiltrating everywhere, position yourself there. I have had conversations with girls that have Hebrew names, and I was thinking, I'm not sure it's totally. No, they give themselves Hebrew Israeli names in order to get into our stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So your hero, Leah. Let's go to a nicer thing to
My
close.
hero is Elika Laban, I'm sorry. She's really one of my absolute all-time favorites. I think she's Iranian. She escaped and she was raised in England. I think yeah, Great Britain. And so she speaks with a very interesting accent. She's a trained lawyer and she is such an advocate of Israel. I mean, extremely. And she mentioned this week that, we can sit and come up with why the reasons the children were killed and point to the left and to the right within Israel. She said it's really all about Hamas. And she said the unthinkable. And she's very, very clear about the roots of all these issues. And it's very courageous young woman,
Yeah. Wow.
very
Wonderful.
articulate.
Thank you. Tiffany.
Yes, so one of my heroes would be Rachel Waba. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but
Mhm.
she is an absolutely wonderful Zionist, activist, scholar, just an incredible woman in the Bay Area. She's really very much in the lion's den, where she is in the heart of progressivism and anti-Israel sentiment. And, she's as a liberal and a human rights activist herself, has such moral clarity. She is also Iraqi Jewish. And she'll be part of my organization. And but she's just always been such an inspiration to me. And she's out there fighting every day.
Wonderful. 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 Well, mine is with mixed feelings, not because of the heroism, but because of the story. And it's Yarden Pibas.
Uh, yeah, yeah, that's a hard image.
Definitely.
To face what he faces after being where he was, and the other man too that discovered that his family was murdered. Yeah, and still today I saw a picture that somebody tore down the pictures, the posters.
Here too, in Cambridge.
Yeah.
But we've been flooding
Well,
with calls. Thank you.
we need
This
to
is
go on.
amazing.
We need to keep the
Yes,
inspiration too. Thank you so
yes.
very much, Tiffany. It was wonderful speaking to you. If we
Thank
could be of any help or support, if we can do something for you, because I think there are certain topics we haven't touched that you speak about because there's so much. And please let us know. And
thank
thank you so much for your time and
Thank you. I
shalom.
just want to know what's your goal for Mizrahi Mosaic? What would you like to see?
I would love to see, just definitely more, engagements, definitely speaking with, great people like you, and, just getting our story out there, because I think just raising that awareness will elevate the conversation and understanding, hopefully, you know.
You
It's
are a
certainly, you're
speaker.
very articulate, and
Yes,
it's
you are a
certainly
wonderful
accomplished your
speaker.
goal for this hour for sure.
Beautiful voice. It's a joy and a pleasure to listen to you. And
Thank you
Yes.
so
with Israel
much.
also work to do about this. Maybe you one day will speak with my ex-husband. He has a lot to say about it too.
Well, it's been such a pleasure, both of you.
Thank you so
Again,
much.
Thank you.
sorry for the
Thank
mix up
you,
earlier, but I'm
everybody.
here if you ever need anything as well, and always want to help your
Hey,
efforts too.
cooking classes are fine.
This was
That,
great.
it's
Yeah.
funny. In one of the things, one of the kind of companion books I want to my anthology is Mizrahi cookbook, where all of
Oh, do it.
the book could do some recipes. I thought that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I
it
make
is.
Moroccan
Well,
fish, but not
it
like
will
you,
be
I'm
the first
sure.
one. I am there. I have so many herbs from Israel from that kitchen.
Oh, we'll do
Okay,
it then.
thank you so much. You need to
Thank
run.
you.
Yeah, I don't want to hold you any longer. Thank you,
Thank you so
Tiffany.
much.
Wonderful. Bye bye.
Bye.